This is the third of a sequence of videos introducing the graphic system Tkinter/TTK. I'll begin by showing a solution to the problems introduced by the previous video, that is, to-dos 3 and 4 in module M6. If you have not yet done those to-dos, pause the video now and do them, then resume the video. Here's where we left off from the previous exercise. We had a Tkinter TK object, and then way down at the bottom, that object had the main loop applied to it. Now we're to do to-dos 3 and 4. 3 says to put a frame on the window, so here I'm making a frame, a TTK frame, and I'll put it on the root with padding 10. We'll experiment with different padding in a moment. I have to grid the frame to make it show up, and then I'm going to go ahead and run it here. Now, in running it, no window shows up, or at least nothing appears to show up. That's because if you have a frame with nothing, it's too small. So I just stopped that run. Now I'm creating my button, my TTK button, on the frame, not the root, but the frame, and I'm setting the text equal to press me. You can set it to whatever you want. Then I'll grid that button and then run again, and we'll see the button show up with it on the frame. So there's the button and can be pressed just like you'd expect. Now I want to show you a couple of errors, so do not do these. If you had in fact put the button on the root when you run, you get a different looking thing. You get press me there button, but it's on the root, not the frame, so it doesn't have that padding. And then I want to show you what happens if you omit the gridding of the button. Well, then you get something you just can't see. Again, it's tiny because the frame has nothing on it. I'm going to go ahead and stop that run and make one more change. I want to make the padding huge just to show you what padding does. You'll see when I run that padding is the space around the outside sort of the frame, the surrounding the frame. That's a solution to to-dos 3 and 4. Pause the video if you have any questions about that or want to check your answer against it carefully. Now let's turn to our next module, m3e. This module shows how to make buttons respond to button presses, how your code tells the button what to do when the button is pressed. Main is the same as we've seen before, except for line 25. That is, main makes a Tkinter.tk object, calling it root. It constructs a frame, putting it on the root, grids the frame. It constructs a button on the frame with a label print stuff, and it grids that button. It then enters the main loop where it sits there waiting for events, in this case, button presses. Now line 25 is the new line. We want to examine first the left-hand side of that line and then the right-hand side of that line. Let's start with the left-hand side. That's the notation for saying that when the print stuff button is pressed, the thing to do, the command, is to be the thing on the right-hand side. The notation must be exactly like that. It's called dictionary-like notation. It's very similar to the notation for a list, except that in the square brackets you don't put a number, you put a string. The string must be exactly command, spelled exactly like that, in order to tell Python this, on the right-hand side of this assignment, is the command or the thing to do when the button is pressed. Make sure you're clear about that left-hand side. Replay the video as needed. Now let's look at the right-hand side of line 25. This is a topic that is typically not discussed until much later in your computer science education, but we're going to understand it at a basic level, and it's quite easy at that level. A lambda expression is an anonymous function definition. That is, a function definition for a function that has no name. The body of a lambda expression in Python must be a single function call. Here, that function call to do stuff, sending it no arguments in this case. So when the button is pressed, the function that is defined on the right-hand side, namely the function that calls do stuff, will run. The lambda is key to make it be a definition of a function and not a function call. If it were just a function call, it would occur when line 25 occurs. Instead, we want the stuff on the right-hand side to occur when the button is pressed. So line 25 says, when the button is pressed, that's the left-hand side, to execute the function defined on the right-hand side, namely the function with no name, that's the lambda, whose body is do stuff, call do stuff. So when the button is pressed, the function who's defined to call do stuff runs, so do stuff runs, and do stuff happens to print onto the console a random 10-letter string. You can read the code there and see that that's what it does. Briefly, it sets up the alphabet, sets a random word to start with the empty string, runs through a loop that goes 10 times. Each time through the loop, it picks a random number from 0 to 25 inclusive, uses that as the index into that letter string, so it picks a random letter, and then appends that random letter to the random word being built up. And then at the end of all that, it prints that random 10-letter word. Make sure you're real clear about line 25. To repeat, the left-hand side is the notation for saying what the button should do when the button is pressed. The right-hand side is the definition of a function that has no name, it's anonymous, and that function, when called, will call do stuff. You should run the program if you haven't already done so. Here's a quick run here to show it to you. As you can see, every time the button is pressed, the function do stuff is called. So again, that line 25 defined the function, didn't run it at line 25. It isn't until it's in the main loop, and then, and only then, when the button is pressed, that lambda expression is evaluated and the function do stuff is called. Once you feel like you understand line 25, go on to M6 and to do 5 in that module. Once you've completed and tested, of course, to do 5 and see that it works, then continue to the next module in the examples, namely m3e. Module m3e will show a solution to do 5, but of course, attempt to do 5 yourself first. You should find it straightforward simply by mimicking line 25, but try your best to genuinely understand what you're doing in to do 5.